There comes a moment in every life where the identity you've worn like a second skin begins to split under its own weight. It doesn't announce itself with ceremony. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply happens, the way a fault line gives under pressure that has been building for years. You wake up one day sensing the quiet fracture, something subtle but unmistakable. A feeling that the person you've been is no longer the person you can remain. It isn't dramatic at first. It feels like a hairline crack in a mask you didn't realize you were wearing. A small rupture that lets in the cold air of a truth you've outgrown. At first, you try to smooth it over. You tell yourself you're tired or stressed or drifting. You blame the season, the job, the people around you. You reach for familiar habits the way someone reaches for broken glasses, still trying to see through them because it's what they've always done. But the crack doesn't care about your excuses. It widens quietly, steadily. Each time you betray your own becoming, every time you pretend you don't know what you know, every time you stay in a place your spirit has already left, every time you swallow the words you needed to speak, or wear the emotion you no longer feel, or repeat a behavior you've already evolved past, the crack grows, and the old self begins to buckle. Most people mistake this stage for failure. They think they're falling apart, breaking down, losing their edge. They interpret the internal rupture as something going wrong instead of something finally going right. Because no one tells you that transformation doesn't feel like rising. It feels like collapsing. It feels like losing interest in the identities that once excited you. It feels like boredom with your own patterns. It feels like grief for a version of yourself that can't come with you. It feels like emotional disorientation, cognitive static, and the strange sense that the world has become too small for the person you're becoming. The crack is not destruction. It is the first sign of evolution. When the old self begins to fail, the deeper self begins to breathe. When the identity you outgrew can no longer hold your energy, it splits to release you. And this rupture is always the starting point of a breakthrough, not a single breakthrough moment, but the slow ignition of a truth you've been circling for years. You feel it as irritation, then restlessness, then an unexplainable desire for something you can't name. You find yourself uninterested in the same conversations, the same distractions, the same personas. You look at people you once admired and realize you've already moved beyond the lessons they represented. You feel the gap widening between your inner knowing and your outer behavior, and you can't unfeel it. What cracks first is the illusion that you can stay the same and still grow. What cracks next is the identity that kept you aligned with environments you no longer resonate with. What cracks last is your loyalty to the version of yourself that survived instead of thrived. And when that final layer gives way, you don't break down. You break open. You don't collapse. You shed. You don't lose yourself. You lose the self that was built for a previous chapter. This moment is not comfortable. The soul rarely evolves through comfort. The soul evolves through honesty. And nothing is more honest than the instant you admit that your old life no longer fits your new awareness. Transformation always begins with truth. Not the polished truth you give others, but the raw truth you've been avoiding within yourself. The truth that whispers, I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending this works. I can't keep carrying what no longer feels like mine. That whisper grows louder every time you ignore it. It presses against the mask of your supposed stability until that mask finally cracks. And when it does, you see yourself clearly for the first time in years. The moment the old self cracks is also the moment your future self enters. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a quiet presence in the doorway. A deeper intelligence that has been waiting for you to stop performing the smaller version of yourself. This presence doesn't push you, it calls you. It draws you toward the life you aren't yet brave enough to claim but can no longer deny. The crack is the opening through which that call is heard. The old identity becomes too heavy to carry and you have to set it down. Not out of weakness, but out of honesty. You feel the shift in your bones before you can articulate it. You feel the change before you can explain it. You feel the truth before you can own it. This stage feels like contradiction. You feel both detached and deeply alive. You feel both lost and incredibly aware. You feel like you're grieving a life you haven't even left yet. And that's exactly what's happening. You are grieving the person you were taught to be so you can make space for the person you actually are. You're releasing a version of yourself that was built from survival rather than authenticity. You're dismantling behaviors that were designed to protect you instead of express you. You're cracking the shell of your old identity so the real one can breathe. Everything that feels like falling apart is actually making room for the self you've been becoming in secret. The part of you that has been maturing beneath the surface. The part of you that outgrew your old dreams quietly. The part of you that realized your environment, relationships, and patterns were too small for your current frequency. That part has been waiting patiently for you to notice. And now you can't unknow what you've finally seen. You were never meant to remain who you were. You were meant to evolve in ways that your past self could never have predicted. And evolution always announces itself through discomfort, through misalignment, through the slow, steady cracking of everything that no longer fits the truth of your becoming. You don't need to be afraid of the break. The break is the beginning, the break is the doorway. The break is the confirmation that you were done shrinking yourself to fit the life you've already transcended. When the old self cracks, it doesn't mean you've lost yourself. It means you've outgrown a version of yourself that was too small for the life you were stepping into. It means the deeper self is surfacing. It means the next chapter has already begun. And the moment you admit this to yourself, the moment you stop trying to glue the old identity back together, the transformation accelerates. You move differently. You think differently. You choose differently. You listen to an inner voice you spent years ignoring. And for the first time in a long time, you feel the truth of who you actually are. The crack is the invitation. The evolution is inevitable. The only question is how long you'll pretend you don't hear the call. When the old self cracks, you start to realize how much of your life was shaped by momentum rather than intention. You see how many choices were made out of habit, how many commitments were inherited instead of chosen, how many identities were stitched together from expectations that were never truly yours. The crack exposes everything you built unconsciously. It shows you the architecture of a self that was assembled for comfort, acceptance, or survival rather than truth. And once that architecture becomes visible, you can't pretend it's stable. You can know the instability of a life built on a foundation that no longer resonates with who you are becoming. The crack forces you to confront the truth. You have been living inside a structure you quietly outgrew years ago. This realization brings a strange clarity. You begin to feel the tension between the life you've maintained and the life that's calling you. The tension isn't there to torment you, it's there to direct you. It shows you what is no longer aligned. It reveals the spaces where you've been shrinking yourself to sustain a story you no longer believe in. The crack is a message. You can no longer hold your evolution hostage to your history. And the moment you accept this, you feel something shift. You feel the first breath of a new identity rising from beneath the rubble of the old one. Most people fear this stage because it feels like losing control. But what's actually happening is the opposite. You're regaining control from the automated patterns that once dictated your behavior. You're reclaiming the authority you once outsourced to fear, to validation, to tradition, to comfort. You are stepping out of an identity that was shaped by survival and into one shaped by self-awareness. And that shift doesn't require force. It requires honesty, because the truth is that you already know what needs to fall away. You already know which relationships have reached their ending. You already know which habits keep you stagnant. You already know which dreams are too small for your current frequency. The crack simply makes that knowing impossible to ignore. This is where the transformation deepens. The rupture becomes a revelation. The revelation becomes a reorientation. And the reorientation becomes a new way of being. You stop looking for permission to evolve. You stop negotiating with limitations. You stop apologizing for your truth. As the old self weakens, the deeper self strengthens. You start making decisions that reflect your current awareness rather than your past conditioning. You start trusting the version of you that sees the world with clearer eyes. You start moving with a quiet conviction that comes from alignment rather than ego. There is a moment in this process where everything feels suspended. You're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. It's a liminal zone, an identity threshold, a space where the old patterns lose their grip, but the new patterns haven't fully formed. This phase can feel like disorientation, but it's actually integration. Your consciousness is reorganizing itself around the truth that has emerged. Your nervous system is learning how to operate at a frequency that no longer tolerates self-betrayal. Your mindset is recalibrating to match the person you're stepping into. This is not confusion, it is construction. The deeper self moves quietly in this stage. It introduces new thoughts, new desires, new boundaries. It sharpens your awareness. It pulls your attention toward what nourishes you and away from what drains you. You feel the momentum shifting not through loud declarations, but through subtle instincts. You start choosing differently without needing to explain why. You start walking away from dynamics that once felt familiar but now feel suffocating. You start noticing the difference between what resonates and what repeats. This is the intelligence of the evolved self guiding you toward alignment. As the crack widens, the old identity begins to fall away, not through dramatic collapse, but through natural irrelevance. The parts of you that were built from fear lose their authority. The parts of you that were built from pleasing others lose their urgency. The parts of you that were built from old wounds lose their purpose. You begin to see the cost of staying who you were. You realize that maintaining the old identity requires more energy than releasing it. And that realization becomes the turning point. Because once you see that holding on to your old self is the true burden, you no longer cling to it. You let it disintegrate with grace. Letting go does not mean abandoning your past. It means acknowledging that your past cannot hold your future. It means honoring the version of you that carried you to this point, while accepting that they cannot carry you beyond it. You don't have to hate who you were to become who you are. You simply have to stop pretending that the old chapter is still your home. Every transformation demands a departure. Not always from people or places, but from the identity that kept you anchored to an outdated reality. When that identity releases, everything else falls into place. This is the moment when you begin to feel the emergence of the new self. Not as an idea or a concept, but as a presence. A tone, a frequency, a shape forming beneath the surface. You feel yourself thinking thoughts you've never allowed. You feel boundaries rising that you've never enforced. You feel a strength coming online that was dormant beneath layers of old fear. You feel a clarity cutting through the noise of obligation and expectation. The new self doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with precision. It arrives with purpose. It arrives with undeniable resonance. This is why the crack is sacred. It is not the end of stability. It is the beginning of authenticity. It is the moment life stops responding to the person you pretended to be and starts responding to the person you actually are. And once this happens, your choices shift. You speak differently. You stop explaining truths that don't need validation. You stop participating in dynamics that undermine your becoming. You stop betraying yourself for the comfort of others. You start living from alignment rather than performance. You start trusting your inner signals more than you trust external approval. When the old self finally breaks, what emerges is not a replacement but a reclamation. You reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned to fit into smaller environments. You reclaim the voice you silenced to keep the peace. You reclaim the intuition you doubted because it didn't match the expectations around you. You reclaim the courage you hid because the world taught you to fear your own power. This reclamation is not loud. It is steady. It is sovereign. It is the moment you realize that the life you want requires the self you have been suppressing. The transformation continues until something clicks. Until the new self isn't an idea you are trying to embody, but a state you are naturally inhabiting. You move with a different gravity. You speak with a different cadence. You navigate with a different intelligence. People feel the shift even before you articulate it. You're not trying to evolve anymore. You are evolution in motion. The crack becomes the chrysalis. The chrysalis becomes the awakening. And the awakening becomes the new baseline from which your life unfolds. This is the truth that most people never fully recognize. The moment your old self cracks is the moment your real life begins. Not the life you were told to want. Not the life you designed from fear. Not the life you settled for when you doubted your own potential. But the life that emerges when you stop resisting the person you were meant to become. The life that aligns with your deeper awareness. The life that responds to your actual frequency. The life that honors your truth. You are not breaking down. You are breaking open. And everything that falls apart is simply making room for the self that has been waiting for you to stop holding yourself back. The crack is not the end. It is the threshold. And once you step through it, nothing in your life remains the same, because nothing in your consciousness will ever again be small enough to fit inside who you used to be.